Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, August 25th, 2025, and today we're talking about selling to restaurants, persistent herbicides, and how late is too late to plant crops in the field. So let's do it. All right, welcome to Monday, friends. I hope you all had nice weekends. If you can't tell by my voice, I did some, let's just call it loud directing from the sidelines this weekend, and sometimes from the couch, but that's a little less dignified. Anyway, it was still a relatively warm weekend. The sun just gets so hot this time of year. It's like it could be 70 degrees and feel like it's the middle of the summer. But the weather is looking quite lovely for the week, so that's nice. However, the dryness here is getting real with no real end in sight. And I definitely did not set the garden up for a mini drought well enough this year, especially after having the complete opposite this spring. I'm able to get stuff, nice and watered in, and to be honest, the tomatoes have almost never tasted better, but it is getting crispy around here. Our poor sweet potatoes, which we dry farm, i.e. we do not irrigate them, are none too excited about this dry spell, I fear, and this is a funny thing to say in a year when we have had 60 inches of rain already. The problem is just all 60 inches pretty much came before mid-July, and then someone turned on the broiler, which was not a good idea. Anyway, not complaining, obviously. We get plenty of rain here in general. Just making sure you all are up to date on Kentucky's weather in case anyone asks. I think that's important. Also, unrelated, this Wednesday we'll do another live episode. That was really fun last time, so we figured we'd bring it back every month or so. I know it's not the most convenient time, but we will do it at that same 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday on YouTube, so bring your questions, mostly about soccer, naturally. All right, so not long ago, I said I was going to update my knowledge on persistent herbicides and talk a bit more about how they make it into our composts with any new insight I can glean. And so I don't know how much more I'm going to add to the conversation here, but let's just kind of give it a little bit of an overview. Okay, so to back up, according to the Composting Council, there are four main types of persistent herbicides: clopyralid, aminopyralid, aminocyclopyrachlor, and picloram. And there are, quote, more than 150 retail products in the US, but these chemicals may appear on labels in slightly different variations, making identification difficult, end quote. These chemicals are used in lawn care, in making hay, sprayed, for instance, to kill broadleaf plants in hay fields, allowing the grasses to thrive. They are used on golf courses and horse pastures for some reason, and roadways, railways, places governments don't want to mow regularly. Some restricted use products that contain these chemicals require licensure, but others are somewhat more over the counter, meaning anyone can purchase or use them, not always responsibly. Then what makes these chemicals persistent is that they are not easily or rapidly decomposed once the job, the herbiciding, is over. Instead, they tend to stay active in the soil for months or even years, and when it comes to composting, the problem there is that not only do they survive the digestion of microbes as they do other animals, these chemicals slowly become concentrated as the material breaks down. So it's a bit like microplastics, for instance. If the microplastics aren't breaking down, like it's just plastic, it's just kind of maybe breaking down a little bit, it was really just turning into smaller and smaller pieces. If the microplastics aren't breaking down, but the organic materials in the compost are, then after a while, what started out as, say, like a pound of microplastics and 500 pounds of materials is now a pound of microplastics in 250 pounds of compost. It's been kind of concentrated. Ditto the persistent herbicides. What went from being a small amount in a large mass, once that mass reduces, but the chemical doesn't, it just becomes potentized. And that's a major problem. It takes an extraordinarily small amount of these herbicides, like 1 part per billion with a B, or less, depending on the herbicide, to have a negative impact on your plants. Anyway, these herbicides enter the compost stream through horse manure because remember, if microbes can't digest it, neither can horses. It comes in on hay and straw. The straw contamination is from pre- and post-emergent sprays, as well as occasionally from desiccation, the spraying of grains to speed up the dry down process, which is not common in all areas. Typically, it's used more up north where maturation can be hard because the seasons aren't as long. And it may not always be a persistent herbicide that they use. It could be Roundup or something, but it can happen. Interestingly, crops treated with clopyralid, for instance, are actually banned for composting in some areas. The challenge is following the life of those crops to keep them out of the compost pile. For instance, if a grain or hay crop is contaminated but is fed to animals and that manure is brought to a compost facility, the composter may never know, especially if they didn't ask or if the person feeding the horse didn't know, that the herbicide was employed somewhere along the stream. Now, composters can ask more questions and be more discerning about their feedstocks, and they are. Composters are getting much, much better about this. But these are chemicals that really should be banned for any sort of use because it's just far too easy for them to sneak through after it changes form a time or two into our food, into our water, all that stuff. Like mushroom composts are often made from manure that is used as the substrate for the mushrooms. Then those chemicals have gone from manure to making some mushrooms to compost that is used on gardens. That's fun. Now, there is some limited evidence that biochar may in fact absorb some of these chemicals when added to the composting process, as well as, interestingly, microplastics, phthalates, and etc., which I look forward to seeing more research on that, assuming that it comes. At some point, I will get a bit more into how these chemicals act actually once they're in the plants systemically, because the chemicals can in fact concentrate in the produce itself as well, leafy greens, beans, broadleaf stuff. But for now, to be honest with you, I didn't find a ton of new info there, but the info that we do have is getting slightly more robust, so that's good. Anyway, let me know if I missed anything, and we'll take a quick break. When we return, selling to restaurants. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. We know it's peak season, you're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free, instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Chris Smith, who writes, quote, "Hey, Jesse, I don't really have a question so much as a topic suggestion." Great. I love topic suggestions. Anyway, Chris writes, not sure if you have talked about this before, but it'd be great to hear about selling to restaurants/chefs. It seems like most independent restaurants near me primarily purchase from a big distributor, i.e. Cisco. And I don't really see a way to break into restaurants like that, end quote. All right, so great question here, Chris. And I think I've done a segment or two on selling specifically to chefs, which I'll link at least one of those in the show notes. But one of the things that should also be discussed in this sort of conversation about selling to restaurants is selling to restaurants that don't necessarily have a chef, or at least restaurants whose menu is mostly set. So we've had accounts like this. We have one now, and they can be some of the best accounts because they just want consistency. They're not trying to change the menu every week or month, or if they do, it's just to add something different to the salad mix they already use, but not actually change what salad mix they're getting. Every restaurant is going to be different though. However, to your question, it is a good idea to know the menu of the restaurant that you're trying to sell to and what you could offer year round and seasonally. So lettuce is an easy one to go year round with, whereas something like tomatoes, unless you're in a very specific climate or have some efficient way to warm a greenhouse, probably not so much. So anyway, it's kind of thinking about like what crops can you grow year round that might fit their menu, which you should be able to see online, or you can go to the restaurant and pick up a menu. That's the first place to start. It's also nice to get an idea of what the food is costing them to purchase. Some of this is available online, just Googling around for the price of like say wholesale carrots or whatever it is that you're wanting to sell them, and seeing what they are, what those are going for wholesale. You will not be able to compete obviously with those numbers. Oftentimes these are like massive farms or co-ops that have all the machinery and all the cheap labor that make it hard to compete with. But there are other things that you can compete with, that you can sort of bring to the proverbial table, such as customer service, quality, local support, fast delivery, all that stuff. Anyway, the challenge with getting into these restaurants is getting the attention of the buyer and presenting a price they will even consider. What I usually recommend for this is to go during a slower part of the day, probably when the crew is prepping for service, and bring some samples and maybe a price list. This goes for restaurants with or without a chef. One thing I like to do is to give them a bag of lettuce to taste, like to eat, and a bag of lettuce to just test. Tell them to leave one of the bags in their walk-in for the next 2 weeks just to observe it. If you have grown your lettuce well, it will outlast the other stuff by a mile. So when they say, I don't know, $8 a pound is a lot of money or whatever it is that you're charging, you can have them look at how much lettuce they throw away from the box trucks and compare that to the lettuce that you gave them as a sample. I almost guarantee they are already paying double what they think they are paying when you factor in the waste. Longevity alone has scored us several customers over the years. It takes it from being more than just supporting a local farm simply to do the local thing to having a quantifiable value that other products just don't have, especially when you just get them from a faceless company. And the carrots are sweeter. The cherry tomatoes have flavor and color and variety and so on. Once they have the sample, just make it a point to give them some space. Allow them to think about it and taste the samples and all that stuff. But follow up a week or so later, preferably with a fresh sheet, a list of products and prices. But if it's in the off season, maybe that's not possible. But if you can, that'd be great. Also, be ready to tell them exactly how they can make orders with you. Don't make that part too complicated. Some restaurants will just want texts. Some will want to call you. Some will prefer email. Most don't like systems that they have to sign up for, so maybe don't be like, here, sign up for this complicated app. They may not go for that. Figure out ways to accommodate them and take note of it. They may give you a system that they want you to sign up for, which is fine. Anyway, be persistent but not pestistent, which is not a term anybody uses. In other words, just give them space, be professional and understanding while also making sure they remember you. Bring more samples later too, if need be, just to keep them thinking about you, keep them thinking about your farm and your product. Make sure the samples look nice and that anything you deliver to them is at the highest possible quality and looks fresh, clean, professional. No grocery bags full of wilted lettuce, y'all. They want a product that they can already envision putting on a plate. It should look pretty much ready to go. Anyway, every restaurant is going to be different in the same way that every farm is different, and you will just need to feel them out, eat there, talk to the buyer if possible or the chef, and be patient. Not all restaurants are going to go for it the first time, but you just need a few busy ones to make it worth your while. So find the ones that you get along with, that are interested in your product, and that are at least curious about what else you could provide them. Also, employee turnover in restaurants is really high. So if you don't land an account, like you don't get along with the buyer, or the buyer's not interested this year, try again next year and you may find a more sympathetic buyer. All right, I hope there was something helpful in there. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll discuss how late you can plant in the field. Be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, so as we start inching closer and closer to the fall, we need to talk about how late you can plant something into the field. Because with sunlight in our region diving at more than 15 minutes per week, by the end of this week, we will have 15 minutes less sunlight than we did at the beginning of the week. Well, there goes our energy source, and plants will simply grow more slowly. So at some point, even faster growing crops are not going to do much of anything. They're just not going to grow that much. In that case, how should we determine what we can still plant in the field and what we can't? First, the biggest determining factor for this is your climate and latitude. The further north you are, the less sunlight you will have to work with in the fall, and it happens fast. Like if you live in Calgary, Canada, you will receive roughly 80 fewer daylight hours in September than, say, like Albuquerque, New Mexico. In October, however, that number jumps to 100 fewer daylight hours. So not only will it be warmer in most of New Mexico at that time, but the further south you are, the more sunlight that you will have going into the fall, which means you can keep stuff growing for longer. Can being the operative word there. There are places like higher elevations and drier regions like that, in New Mexico that will be colder still, but where despite the extra sunlight over Calgary, which is a random comparison, it still gets freaking cold, and the cold air will also slow the growth growth down. Sunlight be darned. So that is where climate will come into play here. If you're in a colder region, in order to grow in the field later in the season, you will also need some sort of frost protection, like a frost blanket for most crops that can both, like keep the soil warm around the crop for, the requisite microbial activity, but also just keep the crop protected from frosts. The closer you get to a frost, the faster you will want the crop to reach maturity. Like French breakfast radishes are a 30-day crop in the summer, but will become like a 60-day crop by October, depending on your region. All right, so not only does the crop need to be faster the closer you get to frost, but also it needs to be hardier. For instance, lettuce, spinach, some radishes, turnips, kales, that sort of stuff is relatively hardy and will survive some light frosts, but beans and squash, even if they are roughly the same number of days to maturity, those sorts of summer crops I would not bother with too late in the season because they're just going to die. Now, you could still grow a fresh round of, like, say, peas in some places. Like, we could maybe do it here in the field. Still, it'd be pushing it. But certainly south of us, like I've said about winter-killed peas, you definitely want to have those winter-killed cover crops in by September 15th, but not really a whole lot earlier than that. Any earlier and you risk getting, peas, unless, of course, that's the goal, which, in this case it would be. And fall-grown peas, for the record, can be quite delicious. The latest I will plant lettuce in the field here is October 1st, and even that is kind of pushing it in some years. And I expect when I plant it that late to have to cover it to keep it from getting too frosted. Preferably, I would plant out all my field lettuce by September 20th, especially for head lettuces. Longer season head lettuces will need to be in here a little bit earlier here in Kentucky Zone 6B by mid-September at latest. And even then might need some row cover to finish them off. Longer season cabbages and broccoli would be tough to pull off at this point. I mean, more or less impossible, at least this late in the season for us or anyone north of us. Maybe a fast broccoli or a Napa cabbage or something would be fine until about the second week of September to plant here, but that's kind of pushing it. The big thing in there is that there's no perfect way to predict what will do well for you. It's going to require some research, like go ask the farmers at your farmers market, and some good note taking to determine how far you can push your field season. Now, planting in a tunnel is a slightly different thing because you can plant much later in a tunnel than in the field. But my typical tunnel rule for winter harvests is that I want everything in the tunnel that I intend to harvest through January. I want it in by October 1st so it will mature, and then I will just keep it alive as long as I can. Then the next plantings go in January for like your March, April, May harvests. Anyway, I think that's our Monday show for you all. Let me know how you all plant in the late summer and fall based on where you are. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, which is running out. It's got like 5 more days-ish, 6. You get a shout out on the show, so big shout outs today to Charles Best. Shouts to you, Charles. Joyce Cole. I don't know why I couldn't say Cole. It's not. You would think that's not a complicated word, but I struggled with that one, but I'll get it next time. Farm Stand on Fish Market, which sounds like a novel in itself, and Cam Pike. Oh, maybe I nailed it with one of those. Thanks, Cam. All right, so this week's story is going to be about a cat. I don't think we've done an animal story yet. So this one is about a cat named Clatter for its tendency to cause a ruckus, but honestly, the name Ruckus was already taken by the dog. But anyway, Clatter is the farm stand cat. And although Clatter would never, ever, absolutely ever admit to having a job, Clatter's job, technically, as Clatter's people saw it, was to, catch mice or any other critter that might come into the farm stand. Clatter was extraordinarily adroit at this task, right? Cruel sometimes, to be sure, but effective. And among the mouse-sized creatures of the area, Clatter had gained somewhat of a reputation for, just waiting just until the victim thought it had scored a treat before announcing her presence and pouncing. Then, however, one day, a new creature walked through the door to the farm stand, familiar looking, but very, very small and somewhat delectable looking. And that is for tomorrow on Clatter Kitty and the very small thing that you will learn about tomorrow. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.